Good evening and welcome to the fourth presentation for the 2023-24 season of AvCan Canada's webinar series. Winter is here and we're excited to share some great presentations with you this season. My name is Lisa Perizzoli and I'll be your producer this evening. Amy Irving is our moderator and will be looking out for your questions in the Q&A box. Thank you for joining us tonight. For 3 years now, we've presented a variety of webinars and found that being online means we get to share our avalanche safety messaging with even more of you than before. We're glad you're with us this evening, and we'd love to see you share these webinars with others throughout the winter. Our mission is to help educate backcountry users to go out and play safe. We want you to know more, go further, and come home. First, we would like to acknowledge that our session is being hosted in the territory of 4 nations, the Sinixt, Secwepemc, Ktunaxa, and Syilx. As a national organization, we also acknowledge the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit nations whose land we live and recreate on. Before we start tonight's session, we would like to thank our sponsors. We are very grateful for our sponsors being loyal in their support of us and working with us to reach backcountry users this winter. We have our government partners, our affiliations, our program partners, our premier and supporting sponsors, and our contributors. This webinar is sponsored by Backcountry Access, or BCA. BCA has been a longtime sponsor of AvCan Canada, working with us to keep you safe, including supporting our youth program and the MEC Avalanche Safety Grant with avalanche safety gear for our toolboxes. We are grateful for their ongoing commitment to avalanche safety. I have a few housekeeping notes to share before we get started. First, everyone is muted automatically. There will be opportunities to ask questions throughout tonight's webinar. To do so, click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will then unmute you so you can ask your question. Another way to ask a question is in that Q&A box, also found at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A box for questions as opposed to the chat box. And lastly, stick around until the end of the webinar as we'll be pulling some names to win prizes from AvCan Canada. Tonight's presentation is From Planning to Powder. It's the evening before you head out and you're planning your trip. You're looking at the avalanche forecast, the weather forecast, checking webcams and weather stations, and deciding where the best terrain is for tomorrow's excursion. In the morning, you're checking conditions again, but maybe you got more snow, or maybe the wind blew a little bit harder, or maybe the sun came out. How might these factors change your plan for the day? In tonight's webinar, we'll hear from 2 pros about how to plan before you head out and how to evaluate and verify conditions once you are in the snow. And if conditions continue to change through the day, how to continually assess and evaluate so you can have both a fun and a safe trip. We have 2 presenters this evening. James Floyer is the Program Director for AvCan Canada. James is involved in all aspects of AvCan Canada's work, including winter forecasting operations, communications, outreach, and education. He has a PhD in snow science and is the co-author of AvCan Canada's Avalanche Skills Handbook for both the ski and sled editions. James lives in Revelstoke with his wife and 2 daughters and likes all forms of winter sports and riding bikes in the summer. Keith Robine has been working in the avalanche patch for over 30 years as an educator and guide. He is the co-author with James of the AST Handbook and is the principal author of the instructor manuals for AST1 and AST2. Keith is the owner and operator of Kootenay Avalanche Courses out of Rossland, BC. So without further preamble, I'll pass it along to James and Keith. Enjoy the presentation.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Keith, are you there?
Yeah.
Are you able to show everybody your face?
Oh, I started my video. Is it not showing up?
Maybe it is, and it's just not on my screen. I'll ask for Lisa's guidance
Yeah.
on.
Keith, I can see you okay.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
perfect. Right on. I'm gonna try and share my screen so that everybody can see. Lisa, maybe you need to stop sharing your screen, and that'll enable me to share mine. Oh, and that means I can see Keith as well. Perfect.
Hey.
Okay, sorry everybody. While we just get things in order here. Lisa, is that looking
It's
okay?
great. Yeah,
Okay, right on. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. This is absolutely fantastic.
mhm.
What a wild ride we've had for weather over the last few days, hey Keith.
Oh man, yeah, it's just the great time to be running one of these webinars because it's just so relevant. And yeah, after last year, I know everybody's that I've been talking to is really keen to, really get on it this year around what's happening with the snowpack and what about conditions. So
Right
here
on.
we are. I
It
love talking
feels like
about it.
it couldn't be a better time to have an example where you've just got really different conditions. You got a range of things going on. We've had some dramatic weather. Some areas we've seen a lot of rain, other places have seen snow, and then there's a
Mm.
mix of rain and snow in the forecast. So we're going to be talking about planning, where to go, what kind of places are suitable under different conditions. And then we're going to focus a little bit on this idea of verifying things as well. So not just doing the planning, assuming everything's going to be just as we think, but keeping our eyes and wits about us as we go into the field to be able to adjust things on the fly. Right on. So
Yeah.
Lisa mentioned this in the introduction, but Keith, you and I worked on a pair of books through 2018 and 2019, and here we are. We're still talking to each other. It's amazing.
It was so great working with James because one, he kept a sense of humor, which you have to have for a project like this. It was so much more involved than one would think, and it was great because although we'd agree on things, we'd disagree on things, and then somehow through all of that discussion, it felt like we just came up with something in the handbook that's even better than just our individual ideas. And I hope we have some disagreements tonight, maybe too. It'll be
Well,
interesting.
there you go. Yeah. People are probably sensing it may not be the first time, but I really appreciate that about your approach. And I think, like I said, I'm proud that we have produced these handbooks, and they do make the basis of the curriculum of the Avalanche skills training courses that Avalanche Canada creates the curriculum for. And then people like yourself, Keith, you're a AST provider, so you're at the front line of delivering these courses. So you must see a whole range of people go through them with different backgrounds and maybe some different experiences, and hopefully you found that they're useful for teaching the courses.
Incredible. Yeah, it's really incredible. And the nice thing about them is, as I've said to students, you read through them when you're first starting and you get all the basic information. But amazingly, James, there's like a lot of the nuanced, more advanced information in there as well. And so you read it a second time, a third time as you gain more experience, and then you're taking different parts of the book with you. Yeah, I mean, I'm biased, but
Yeah, I feel like we're trying to sell something here. Anyway, it's one point that I wanted to make about the daily process, and it seems when I see it on the screen here, it just seems like quite a simple, intuitive system here. But I promised the audience here that this was several days of intense discussions, and we'd had discussions about the individual words and the order and whether or not a concept belonged in that particular place, and so this is a distillation of quite a bit of thought. But the point I wanted to make was that this came from experiences of professionals, and what Keith and I wanted to do was to bring some sense of suggested structure into how best to approach a day of touring or riding, or hiking in the mountains, whatever you want to do in the winter, and give it a little bit of structure. And everyone's thought process is slightly different, so maybe there's different ways to organize these in your head. And actually, Keith, you did a webinar a week ago where there was a similar version of this, but very slightly different, and that's fine. But one of the things that makes professionals successful and safe doing this day in, day out is that there is some structure to their process.
Yeah, it's like a discipline. We talk about that in the book as well, around good human behaviors, and that discipline isn't like, oh, I'm so disciplined.
Yeah.
I can't say that I am all the time,
Right.
but when it comes to avalanche stuff, I just follow these steps on an everyday basis when I'm going into the backcountry, because one, it gives me some confidence that I'm doing things relatively safely. Nothing's 100% safe, but I say to students, I think you can use this tool and make it such that the most dangerous part of the day is driving to the trailhead on winter roads, and then the backcountry day is maybe similar or less than that kind of danger, and so we can do that. At the same time, using this structure helps me get confidence when I want to step into more aggressive terrain under the proper conditions. So it works so well, and I feel like I've gotten more gnarly runs because of that confidence, and yet knowing,
you feel confident, and then that means you're confident in your decision. You get to fully be in the moment, enjoy the ride that you're doing, enjoy whatever it is that you've decided to do under those conditions,
rather than just that's really worrying.
Yeah, right on. So Keith, it would be great if you could take us through the daily process, and then then maybe we'll come back and we'll focus on that verification.
Yeah, we're gonna just kind of go through these steps, and we'd like to have the audience involved in this. So we're gonna send out some polls, and Amy's gonna send you a poll at each of these steps, just to sort of get a sense for what's your engagement, even if you don't, call it Get the Forecast, or call it the daily process. Even before we started the daily process, these are the steps that talking with people, they just do anyway. So just answer honestly. You're not being tested or monitored. We just want to see, and then you can see kind of where the audience is in terms of getting the forecast. So how do you use the forecast? And I really like the way that the forecast is developed, because right up front you get the danger ratings, and that's like the first step, and then as you read further into it, you get more information, and this will become relevant when we start talking about the second step of the daily process, which is to plan your trip. So maybe we should just move on a little bit.
It's looking like, okay, it's looking like we've got, I would say, in the most part, a very engaged audience. So
very engaged.
Over 80% selecting, they're drilling down for the danger ratings, avalanche problems, and details, and then more than half looking for as much information as possible. I mean, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and we can talk about that here on the next slide.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, and also besides the desktop version, there's also a mobile version. And James was telling me that 60% of you guys use the mobile version, so that's good to know. So then we want to plan our trip, and hopefully many of you recognize this terrain rating system that was developed quite a long time ago now. Simple, challenging, and complex. And so we use that to make a plan. And if we go to the next slide, James, we'll see the trip planner. And I keep pulling this slide up in presentations and with students, because ultimately it comes down to choosing the right terrain for the conditions. You know, James and I were talking at the beginning and kind of joking about disagreeing. And disagreeing is I don't know if it's the right word, really. It's just different ways of looking at things, because there's so many different ways to consider danger and so many factors that are involved. You can get your head spinning in all of this, and so that's what the trip planner really helps with. Is it just gives us a foundation for making that choice of choosing the right terrain for the conditions. And when your head starts to spin with all the information that's out there, remember that the trip planner helps you with that foundational skill.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. And having a simple process to anchor on, I think, is really important. And honestly, it's often what professionals, guides, snow science professionals are doing on a daily basis. Again, a similar set of results. It looks like we're favoring number 3, use your judgment to come up with a plan A and plan B. Having that plan B is super important. And we'll come back to that as well as we discuss verifying conditions. And if you verify conditions and things aren't as good as you thought, then having that plan B is what allows you to fall back on something. You're not disappointed because it's still a great objective for the day, and it's all baked into the process. So I'm very happy to see that.
And before we move on from this slide, James, I just wanted to mention too that the green, yellow, red, it really tells you kind of what to do, and green. But to give a little more information, green is really good for people that are just getting into the backcountry, because they can go with some skills like AST1 and use normal caution, but they've got some buffer, and it's pretty unlikely that they're going to get themselves into trouble. Where things start getting tricky is in the yellow. And the yellow is tricky. Yellow doesn't mean necessarily go. When some people get to a stoplight and they see the yellow changing in the stoplight, some people think that means, oh, I should put my foot on the gas and go. And some people think, oh, I should stop. And this is sort of similar. It's not necessarily clear cut. And what I've been saying to people, especially after last year's tricky snowpack, is that to travel in the yellow, you need to dig deeper into the forecast rather than just the danger ratings. That's where you start looking at the avalanche problems. So it's a little bit outside of our focus for today, but I just thought I'd add that in because it's such a crucial part of staying safe.
I love that. Green means go, red means stop, and yellow means go very fast. I don't think that's the right message, is it? That's not the right.
It depends on who you are.
Yep.
But at least look at the avalanche problems, because that's really
that's the right message.
Where you have direction around what are the places to travel. And an example of how you would use that is in the AvSavvy free online tutorial that's on the Avalanche Canada website. And they have all these cool interactive websites, like this one is an example where you get to choose, how you get from the bottom to the top. And it's just showing that if you chose this particular route, it would be like, ooh, yep, you did really well, except for that one spot, because you ended up undercutting a steep slope. And if you went a little further to the left, you could avoid that. So it's just so cool that there's so many ways to learn. And as James mentioned earlier, part of planning your trip is to come up with a plan B. And it's not that this picture shows the plan B, but maybe this is, because as you can see in this picture, there's certainly some lower angle terrain, a lot of simple terrain in this picture, not all of it. but it gives some opportunities if you're worried about what you see out there. It looks to me in this one, James, like there's been a lot of wind effect.
You
So,
know what? If anyone's really savvy, this is actually a photo from Newfoundland, from the east.
ooh, fun.
Newfoundland has some quirks, and one of them is the wind. Another one is the scoured, sort of upside down, small tree, shrubby tree type things as well. So,
Wow,
yeah.
very neat. And then step 3 is to, get your gear, check your gear. This is the essential gear: transceiver, probe, shovel. And then there's also recommended gear, which includes airbags, communication devices, and radios. Radios are becoming more and more of a common tool. We talk about communication being so key, and I'm really warming up to having radios.
Yeah, and skiers, sledders alike. Sledders, I think, have been, fair to say, maybe leading the charge a little
Leading
bit
the
on
charge, yeah,
communication because it's
yeah.
a lot more critical, and you can be further apart. Skiers tend to have the advantage of being in shouting distance, but even so, if you're skiing a full line all the way down, and that's what you've decided to do before the next person jumps in to maintain a one at a time, having that ability to communicate with the rest of the group, I think, is really valuable. So,
And then the next step is to verify conditions. And part of this happens before you even get to the trailhead. So it can happen at home. It can happen even on the way to the trailhead. And you want to just obviously get as much information as you can. And then you go into the backcountry and you continually verify, what it is that you're seeing, how it compares. That's the kind of the key part to what the forecast was, and that should help tell you whether the danger rating is what you expected, or whether maybe you need to move to plan B because things are more dicey. And James is going to talk about that a little more here in a second. So let's keep the flow going in the daily process, and just briefly go through all these good travel habits that basically give us an extra margin of safety when we are traveling in avalanche terrain. Communication, of course, being key. Going through slopes as much as possible, one at a time, or in this case, spreading out quite a bit. Grouping up in safe spots. Planning an escape route. James put together these slides, and when I looked at this one, I was like, ooh, escape routes. I like the look of the one that is on the right on my screen. Yeah, that goes off to
you
the
like this
ridge,
one?
because that's like, ooh,
So
yeah,
you're
high
saying you don't
ground.
like these ones
Whereas
down
the
here?
bottom
These,
one, James, like, that
ah,
means you're going to somehow outrun the avalanche, and that's hard to do. James is really fast, so maybe he can outrun the avalanche better than me. But yeah,
yeah,
but it's so tricky.
I'll wear that one for sure. Sometimes if that's where you end up, you may not have other choices. So wherever you are, you can be thinking about
You still
escape
want to
routes,
you
and
still want to
sometimes you're
try
choosing between, a couple of bad options, but you're just choosing the least worst option.
the least worst
And
option. Yeah,
um,
the lesser of two evils. Yeah, and
mhm,
and a lot of that is all part of when you're evaluating slopes, which is in the next step, is well, I like this slope over that slope because it's got a better escape plan.
yeah.
Um,
Well, there's a little
yeah,
bit more terrain to discuss
good.
here, and there's lots of
And
options.
oh my God, we could do a whole webinar, of course, on this. Maybe we'll get to do that someday. But using terrain wisely. In this case, James is pointing out the high ground, and
Yeah,
that's a
yeah,
really good example of that,
I'm going here.
because when you're on high ground, you're just almost impossible to way less likely to get overtaken by an avalanche. But we should move on because we want to focus on our key topic, and of course also actively looking for instabilities.
Yeah, try
And
and
of
get
course
those
there's
little pockets
overlap
to
in all of
go.
these steps, and they kind of happen at the same time. I did this webinar last week with Joe Stock, and that's what he showed in his diagram, was this like cool circle of all these things happening at once when you're in the field. It's not like, oh, let's do this step and then we'll do the next step. They're all happening
It's like a
as we travel.
feedback loop where you're
Yeah, it's a
constantly going
feedback.
back and you're
Yeah,
making observations and reassessing,
exactly.
making sure that everything's still on track. Yeah, I like that approach.
Yeah, yeah. And then this is just, in the next step again with evaluating slopes, you're really getting into the nitty gritty in this step of where am I in the terrain and what kind of risk is there to me? And these are some of the factors that you would look at in the slope evaluation card in terms of both conditions and in terms of terrain that can make it, more or less safe. Things like terrain traps can make us even a small slope a really bad proposition in terms of danger because might get really messed up even in a small avalanche.
Yep, right on. So, so Keith, we got well, a little prompt here that that it does get a little bit more complicated in the slope evaluation, but of course, this is where an AST course will focus on a fair bit of time, is trying to give people strategies, and the evaluator, of course, is the sort of formalized strategy. Not everyone likes to carry a card with them in the backcountry, but it does do a very good job of listing those main factors. Um,
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is in the AST2, which is, I like to say is part 2 of the AST program, right? It's really the courses are designed to go together with a bit of a pause in the middle, so that you can get some experience after taking your AST1,
yeah,
and then you've got a whole bunch of stuff in your head, and you're ready for the AST2, and really incorporating that stuff into the bones of your body. All these other concepts like, how do I use the avalanche problems to, negotiate that yellow part of the trip planner, because that's not necessarily a go or a no-go. And in a year like last year, where the snowpack was so tricky, it was crucial, right? It was crucial to be thinking about the avalanche problems. And that's really where the AST2 digs into the curriculum, and covers those things in
so
the kind
true.
of detail
Yeah,
that's needed to be so thorough.
yeah, yeah. So I jumped the gun by moving on to this last slide, but I am curious because I know you have a more of a social science background, and I think you helped me understand how important this
Mm.
is in the context of dealing with a what we call a wicked learning environment, where if you get caught in an avalanche, you don't get a second chance. That's it's a very serious situation. So I'd love to hear your words, and then I'm curious about the audience, how the audience tackles this one too. Maybe we should
Oh yeah,
throw
maybe this would
throw
be
up
a
a
good time
poll.
to throw another poll up there.
Hmm.
Um, uh,
While
and
while you're discussing, yeah, the
kind of
importance of
a fun way of how you reflect. And right, since we did the daily process in 2018, I've been, I don't know if struggling, but I feel like over time I've been understanding the reflect on the day in greater depth. And you bring up a really good point, James, in that because it's a wicked learning environment, like in some ways, when you get in an avalanche, okay, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but if let's say you survive the avalanche, in some ways that's a good thing because you just got feedback on your behavior.
yeah,
You
right.
learned something from
Yeah.
the mountain. The problem is that if nothing goes wrong, you didn't really get any feedback.
So
It did.
am I
It did.
straying too far out of my lane if I say that getting caught in a small avalanche may be okay in a limited set of circumstances? I don't know.
I don't
Lisa's
know. Are we going to
probably
get in trouble?
she's gonna kill. I'm gonna get in trouble for
The
saying that.
program director for Avalanche Canada might be listening.
Yeah, but the caveat here is that
Well,
it's gotta be small.
it's got to be small
It's got to be a
and
size one in small terrain with people standing by.
spotting you. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
we talk about that in the book. I think it's really legit. We're not here to be the police of safety. As I said, avalanche education and the culture around it has changed. And I think we're much more cognizant of the fact that actually the public is very savvy, very savvy. And the fact that obviously we talk about fatalities with a great deal of respect for the people that are affected by it. And yet we can learn from that. But to get to my point, which is that, last year was a tough year, and most recreationists got through it just fine. And they had to be really savvy. So I just have a great deal of respect for the average, backcountry skier, snowmobiler. I mean, look at the snowmobilers, right? We were like thinking they were a train wreck, 20 years ago, when we started seeing the numbers of snowmobilers getting in avalanche accidents go up, and they got on board with this whole avalanche
Absolutely.
education thing,
Yeah,
and there's so
things are
much
very
safety.
much a parity now between skiers and
Yeah, yeah.
snowmobilers and skiers. Yeah,
Anyway, so that's all part of this reflecting on the day, is just making those critical questions of, where were we most exposed today? Where were we most at danger? I think that's a really good question to
yeah,
ask, and think about those critically, and realize that although we got through the day safely, hopefully, maybe we were close to getting in an avalanche, and just look at it more critically. Not to say that we're not making good decisions, but we can always improve.
yeah. Right on. So just looking at the poll there, yeah, by far and away the biggest is in the vehicle on the way home. So that's useful information, and that resonates. I mean, that's great. Great to see. Thank you so much to that 31% who are submitting them in. Love that to be 60 or 70%. Wouldn't that be amazing? Because that really does help. And I've sat on the forecasting desk. I know that the forecasters read every single one of the min posts that get submitted, and it is valuable information. It really does help. Yeah, it's a real critical information source. So thank you.
And even if you're fairly new to backcountry travel, taking a picture is so valuable. And the min is set up for all levels. You don't have to know snow science or be a pro recreationist to submit.
Absolutely right.
Everybody's submissions are welcome, and they're so
Yeah,
useful.
so true. Yeah, right on. We're back to number 4.
Yeah, that's the kind of main topic.
Right on. Yeah, so I mean, this idea of verifying conditions, it's maybe not the most intuitive. As we go through the daily process, it's easy to know what we mean by get the forecast, check your gear. Those ones are fairly intuitive, I think, for most people. And this idea of verify conditions, wouldn't it be great if we didn't need to do this? If we had such accurate small forecast regions that we just knew that we could just assume that everything was good to go and our forecasts were perfect. And the reality is a little different. Our forecasters are the best in the business. They do a fantastic job, but we deal with areas that are up to 40,000 square kilometers at a time. We have incredibly challenging mountain weather. We've got, the Pacific Ocean, of course, very predictable, and all of a sudden those weather systems just slam into the West Coast. We've got a complex nature of interacting mountain ranges with valleys and passes, and it just goes crazy. It goes haywire. And we've got Arctic air that comes down from the north. We've got warm air that comes from the south. And Canada, Western Canada in the winter is the meeting point and the mixing point of all of these influences. So it's incredibly complicated. So it's not surprising that we do get surprised sometimes. And so this is a really key part. And we've broken it down into 2 main areas of consideration. One is things that you can do before you leave your house to verify conditions. Maybe now, we can extend that a little, as long as you're not the one driving and using your phone at the same time, have a co-pilot, on the way to the trailhead. But This is the key question. So what weather did the forecaster expect? Usually that's in the overnight period and then into the day that you're traveling. And then what weather did we get? So to answer the first one, the best place to go is the forecast. So it's a couple of days old here, so my apologies. But this is always how the forecast is organized. So we have this weather summary. It's in the details page. So you do have to go into the detail. Looks like the audience we're talking to tonight is quite used to doing that, which is great. But I do encourage you, and when you go into the details, focus on this piece here, the weather summary overnight, and then extend that into the next day.
Next day, yeah.
So, here we go, cloudy with 2 to 5 centimeters of snow. So that sort of sets the baseline for what the forecaster was thinking when they built the weather forecast. And then Tuesday, they were just expecting cloudy with a trace of snow or rain. So it sounds like it might be a little bit warm. There's a little bit of a clue, but the forecaster wasn't expecting a whole bunch of precipitation. So if you get information from a remote weather station, or even if you look outside and your truck outside the front of your house has got 15 or 20 centimeters of snow on it, that's a good clue that things might be a little bit spicier than the forecaster had imagined. And I mentioned that weather stations are a key. We unfortunately don't have weather stations everywhere, and some weather stations sometimes go down and don't provide good information. Some of these weather stations are organized on Avalanche Canada's website. That's the easiest place to go and get that information. But there are other resources. And here's one that I'm going to share. It's called ARFI. Amy, the full URL for this is arfi.avalanche.ca. And it's really just a geo collection of good resources. The icons are a little small on the screen. I'm sorry about that. But this red one here is a weather station icon. This blue one is actually a snow pillow, which is actually used by the River Forecasting Center for hydrology purpose. But you can use this information to get up-to-date temperatures and new snow. There's a little bit of learning involved, but with a little bit of commitment. And then there's some webcam resources and some ski hill area reports. All of these things are excellent information. Here's another resource, windy.com. And Windy is mostly a weather forecasting site, but it happens to have a really excellent webcam interface here. And my apologies for this. This is a nighttime picture. During the day, obviously, these should show more than headlights. But you can scroll around here and get a good indication of, whether there's a lot of snow, a lot of new snow, something about the real-time conditions. And then personal observations. I mentioned already that the truck in the driveway, what a great place. And then as you travel to the trailhead, keep on monitoring that as well. And here are some rules of thumb. And, like any rules of thumb, there's always places where they're going to be broken. But just to anchor on some simple rules, if you're seeing 10 centimeters or more of expected snowfall, then that's a good flag to bump the danger up. If you're seeing wind higher, we sort of talk about these steps of wind. So you got low wind, light wind, you've got moderate wind, you've got strong wind, extreme. If you're going from light to moderate, that's going to be a good prompt to bump up that danger. And then the third one really is unanticipated warming. So if the forecast talks a lot about warming, that means the forecaster was well calibrated. They were thinking about that as they were writing the forecast. But if they're not really talking about it, or if the temperatures were more in the -3 or 4 range, but all of a sudden you're getting +1 or +5, then that should be a flag to say, oh, maybe there's something else going on. I'm wondering whether this is, sorry, Keith, it's been so great to be chatting with you here.
Yeah.
It's like the band coming back together here. This is so great, but we're forgetting to bring the audience into this. So Uh, Amy,
Oh, well.
Lisa, are there questions from the audience that Keith or I can address?
Yes, we do have one, at least one question has come in. The question is from Lyndon. The question is, for Rogers Pass, which are the best weather stations to check for actual snowfall? Examples, Abbott, Rogers Pass, Fidelity. Some of the data that's been coming through looks strange or inconsistent. Perhaps the automated measurements mess up sometimes. Can you speak
Yeah.
to sort of the best way to look at Rogers Pass?
Yeah, go for it, James. That's your home.
It's in my area. You know, I always preface it that at Avalanche Canada, we forecast for outside of the national parks, and the national parks are responsible for forecasting and the resources in the national parks. That said, there's a consistent issue here, which you often have to look at these weather station reports with a lens that they're real-time data. And because in order to get real-time data, you have to accept that there's going to be some inconsistencies. One thing I do tell people is if you look at them in chart form, so if you pull, rather than looking at the table, if you look at the chart, it's way easier for most people's brains and eyes to skim over those inconsistencies. Like if you see a big spike that goes all the way up to 400, which sometimes happens, and then an hour later it comes back down to the level that you expect, our brains just disregard that. Whereas if you see it in a table, we have to do all this mental work to figure out, oh, is that a spike? You know, so I would encourage you to look at them in a chart rather than in a table.
You mean
And then
like
on
the when you go to the weather vane on the avalanche.ca page?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I find
Yeah,
that's
there's a little
really
option to
useful.
look at it as a chart.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's not the default option, unfortunately. Maybe we should consider that, but that's a good trick. And then, you know, to answer your question about snowfall, Fidelity is sort of one of our key locations. It's sort of, you know, it's like an anchor location. It is on the high side. It's on the western side of Rogers Pass, which means it's getting more of the upslope with our typical westerlies or southwesterlies. So it'll be on the higher side for most of that winter weather that comes from the west or the southwest. But it's a very standard, well-calibrated area. So I would suggest focus on the snowfall and Fidelity, and you probably won't go wrong. You may be a little disappointed if you're going into other areas, maybe, but it's less likely that you'll underestimate the snowfall.
I was a little jealous because I noticed that Fidelity got well over a meter in the last couple days, like in terms of their, height of snow. It's great.
And
Yeah.
then we have one more question that came in through the Q&A box. The question is from Jennifer. It is, can you discuss resources for route finding and offline maps that are commonly used?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to take this one, Keith?
Well, I think a good place to start is the avalanche.ca website, because there are a number of areas where they're simple, challenging, and complex terrain are mapped. And if it's one of those areas that you're going to, it's a fantastic way to start on that. A lot of again, those are the sorts of things that we cover so much in depth in an AST2. I usually require my students to get some sort of a mapping app for their phones, so that they can download maps onto their phones and travel with them in the backcountry. And then even on a desktop version, they use those maps to help plan trips. But yeah, there's a whole webinar worth of information. I know we have a few other things to cover, so maybe I'll
There
just
is,
stop there.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, our crew at Avalanche Canada, we use Gaia as a route planning tool. We also use FatMap That seems to have some very good high quality resources.
Al
Um,
Topo, there's
I
another
know in
name.
the motorized world, Onyx is very
Oh yeah,
popular.
Onyx is, yeah, that's the one I've been hearing
And
about.
I think in this space we're going to see a lot more development actually in the next few years.
Mm.
And Avalanche Canada has a mapping project that we're eyeing, I guess, and we're hoping to extend the eights mapping more broadly
Oh,
across Western Canada. And for those of you who are nerding out in this area, or want more knowledge, there's an eights version 2 out there, which has extended it from a 3-point scale to a 5, including non-avalanche terrain and extreme terrain, which serves ice climbers, but also high-end, scrambler skiers looking
mm,
for descents down cool walls, things like that. So
yeah.
yeah, interesting discussion. Shall we go
Yeah,
back to verify conditions
let's
and
yeah, because
then?
James was talking about the things you do before you hit the trailhead. And I think the next slide kind of starts then from the trailhead. What else are we verifying? And really a lot of the same things. So if we go to the next slide, the main things that can affect avalanche danger are how much new snow did we receive? And I just love those days, when you're out and it starts dumping in the morning, and by like lunchtime you've gotten like 20 centimeters, and it's just so amazing out there. And the avalanche conditions are changing so dramatically. Um, and so it's pretty exciting, and you really got to be on your skills to be managing the risk as things are changing so dramatically. So yeah, how much new snow did we get? Is it much more? And as James said, that he used that term calibrate, that you have to think like the forecasters do, and they had a forecast. So, look at how much they expected, and that's what made the danger rating. So if it's much different than that, then you may have to bump the danger up. In one of our exercises, you can keep going, I think, James. We'll talk about why you probably wouldn't want to bump the danger down, because it depends on the avalanche problems, and just because there wasn't new snow doesn't like make a persistent slab problem go away.
Yeah, so true.
Um, and then of course, wind. My friend wrote a story that's in the Avalanche Skills Training Handbook about how he went out on a day when it was moderate danger, and but he noticed that it was just super windy, like much more than expected, and he triggered an avalanche and went for a ride. The story's called The Ride. And it's just one of those really fascinating stories, and you can imagine yourself making those same decisions, thinking it's moderate danger, it's got to be okay. And then, but then the back of, in your gut, you're like, oh man, but it's so windy. So that's a really important one. And then warming. Yeah, I remember an April trip where, we tried to get an early start, and I knew that there was this one slope. We were doing the circumnavigation of this peak, and it was like, we got to get there by noon. And it was like noon or like 12:20, and it was like, oh, it's a little late, but I think it's okay. And I stepped onto the slope, and it was too late. Luckily,
Mm,
I triggered it at the top, and
mm,
just watched in horror as I saw the avalanche go down. But that was one of the few times I've had one of those moments of like, oh
mm.
my God.
And a slab avalanche in that instance, Keith?
Yeah, slab
Yeah.
avalanche, just because it was just too warm. I mean, the snowpack overall was stable as long as it was cold, but it was April, and with the heating of the sun,
Mm.
it just started to lubricate.
It's a good reminder. I mean, it's easy to think of these warm conditions as just being conditions you expect: loose snow, loose wet avalanches, which typically aren't all that dangerous. They're slow. Most people with some degree of skill can ride out of them if you've got your wits about you. But slab avalanches are such a different beast, and they also
Mhm.
occur when you get this significant warming.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yep. This
Yeah,
is
and
sort of,
then
yeah,
look
yeah,
for signs of instability. Go
totally.
ahead.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something?
Oh yeah, was sort of we're moving into an area, into that intersection between verifying and conditions and evaluating slopes, I guess. These are some of the
Oh, for
same
sure.
tools
Yeah.
you would use to evaluate slopes, looking for these signs of
Mhm,
instability.
mhm.
But maybe the common thread here is it something that was unexpected? And
Mhm,
if
mhm.
these are your signs, these are your free indicators that avalanche conditions are spicy. If you do see these small avalanches, if rolls are popping off, if you have remote triggering, all of those kind of whoops as well, which is the
Yeah,
noise you get
wumping and
when,
cracking. Yep,
yeah, cracking, all of those
yep,
things.
yep, yep.
Uh,
Sometimes we call them red flags.
yeah, yeah,
Yep. And
yeah,
last year was so tricky because we didn't see a lot of those red flags.
yeah.
And yet the snowpack was unstable, and for a lot of people, they got surprised. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Right on.
So it all just fits into this thing called the daily process. And, whether you say, oh, I'm using the daily process, or whether you basically just do all of these things, that's what keeps you safe. But we have some opportunity for you guys to put your skills to work, your savvy skills. So maybe we should go to those, James. Yeah, this is great.
You see that?
So here's a picture of some terrain, and we also included the trip planner so you can quickly refer to it. And in this particular case, and we're going to bring up the poll here in a second, you're dealing with moderate danger with persistent slabs, unlikely to possible, size 2 to 3, and in this case poll, we want you to choose what slope you could ride with reasonable risk. And again, that's sort of like comparing it to the risk of driving to the trailhead. And would you choose plan A, plan B, or plan C, which might be to go to a completely different location with simple terrain? I like to call that back pocket terrain, James. It's like the terrain that I know I can go almost any day of the winter, and it's always in my back pocket, and I can just refer to it or go to it when I'm worried about conditions. But here's a day, where, as I said, sometimes you can ride things with more confidence, and uh, um, uh, moderate danger is still some danger. And yeah, this is a tricky one, and this is where maybe
Mhm.
James and I'll disagree.
We're
Uh,
we're in the gray zone, or we're in the yellow.
well, and that's the thing too. Can you guys see my cursor if I move that?
No,
Or
I
James,
think,
you probably can, but if you
yeah,
see under moderate danger, simple and challenging terrain are green, but the complex terrain is kind of where things get a little bit dicey. And
yep,
and
yep.
plan B, yeah. So a few people might choose plan A,
Mm-hmm.
plan B. Yeah, okay. I like their choices, James. What do you
Mm-hmm.
think?
Yeah. And I mean, it's a tricky one because obviously different people have different risk tolerances.
Mhm.
And so there is an element of personal choice in here. One of the things that helps me make those decisions is consequence, I guess. And you're always
Yeah,
balancing that sort of likelihood. But if there is a sort of somewhat elevated likelihood, but the consequence is going to be more severe. It's a
yeah,
steeper slope with a terrain trap at the bottom or something that
yeah,
can really sway it
yeah.
for me one way or the other.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're right, and that's why I keep saying you got to go to the avalanche problem, because, even though the persistent slabs are unlikely to possible, it's a low probability. It's a pretty high consequence
Hmm.
if it does go. So yeah, and
Well,
plan B,
well,
that looks like a good line. Well, let's keep this rolling, because this is about verifying conditions. So in case one, it was similar to what was written, but in the case two poll, which Amy's going to pull up, 20 centimeters more snow than expected fell. And so now, which slope are you going to choose? 20 centimeters. I love when 20 centimeters
I'm
more falls.
curious. Yeah, I'm curious. Yep. So 20 centimeters more, we're certainly pushing up, if the rule of thumb, if you apply that rule of thumb, we're pushing
Yeah,
into the considerable, but 20
yeah.
centimeters is getting close to sort of our thresholds, at 30 centimeters for sort of the onset of maybe natural avalanche activity, that kind of thing. So I'm curious here.
Well, you and Mark, put together the Dangerator, and that's kind of
Mm,
a really cool tool that helps people, you know, come up with their own forecast. And I think it was like 30 centimeters or more in the
yep.
last 24 hours would even make you start to think about high.
So
Yeah,
we've
this
got
is
a,
great. Look at this. This is fantastic.
yep. We're
Yeah,
split
because I
almost
think,
evenly between Plan B,
and Plan
which
C, right?
certainly
Yeah,
is the more mellow of the options
yeah,
here, and then Plan C, presumably being you wouldn't even go to this piece of terrain. You're
right.
kind of sticking
Because
somewhere totally
because this
different.
terrain requires pretty precise route finding, hey?
Yeah, it does.
And if you got off route, you could certainly get into trouble.
And there's
So
some exposure from these steep slopes from
I know,
above
I
as
I,
well.
I always wonder about that in this picture.
So
Let's
And
indicating.
move.
Keith, we do have one question about this scenario.
Oh, sure.
Mhm.
If you were, looking at this from the vantage point and you were sort of interested in just weighing the options, it's hard to tell from the picture how steep the plan A option is.
Hmm.
If people are, looking at different routes, what would you suggest in terms of evaluating slope steepness?
Ooh.
That's a
I really encourage people to download an app on their phone so that they have an inclinometer. And, in when I teach courses, I'm constantly quizzing students on, guess what the slope angle is here, or guess what the slope angle is on that slope over there. And then, we use our inclinometers to try to verify how close we are. And because it's tricky, sometimes you look at a piece of terrain, and depending on the angle that you're looking at it, it looks steeper or less steep. So
no, it
again,
absolutely does.
there's no
Yeah.
one thing
It's an
that
astute
helps you.
question, and I think, you can get better at looking at these
You
photos
do,
and
yeah.
looking at the clues, and some of the clues are,
The
these cliff faces
rocks.
obviously going to be very steep, and then these pieces here where you've got these trees that obviously are very close, the tops of the trees are very close to the snow. So, this in here, what would you say? We're probably 45, maybe 50 degrees in here. On the
Yeah,
slope where
maybe
it's
not quite
marked,
that
what do you
steep,
think?
but yeah.
38?
Yeah, it looks like prime avalanche
Prime
terrain,
avalanche
which is
terrain.
like,
Yeah.
35 to 40,
Yeah.
45 even maybe
Mm,
in spots. Yeah. Maybe
yeah.
we should move on because
Yep.
people are maybe going to go to the bar or something after or go to bed.
Yeah, debrief our session.
So this is a good one. And I'm anxious to see what people think on this. So here we have considerable danger with storm slabs likely, size 1.5 to 2.5. So a different kind of avalanche problem. And in this case, which would you ride, A, B, or C? So it's the same kind of options, but obviously different terrain. If the conditions were similar to what the forecast predicted in terms of snow and temperature and wind and all those things. And again, you could use the trip planner, to see, okay, considerable danger, simple terrain is green, challenging terrain is yellow, and complex terrain is red.
Hmm. I'm curious to see what we're going to see here.
Yeah. Because this isn't moderate, this is considerable.
Yep.
I love it.
Yep. We're
Yeah,
split
this
pretty
is
much evenly
good.
between
This is
A and
good.
B.
Yeah,
Yep.
and
Yep.
that's the nature of
Yep.
nobody's right, nobody's wrong. I think there's good arguments for all three of those.
Plan A is not a terrible route.
Ah,
It is, there's no question it's steeper. But we're dealing with a storm slab problem. So there's, it's easier to get a sense of how that is going to react. It's a little bit more obvious than a persistent slab problem.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me on that?
Yeah, yeah. There might be some places where you could do some ski cutting in this. And hey, way to go, William. William Langstraw. That's what I was just about to
Good
say.
escapes. That's right.
Yeah,
You're close to the
William
trees.
nailed it, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the thing I like about A. So James, if you were to draw your cursor from like the top of plan B, fall line straight down, I would not ski that route.
This would be a much higher bar route. I agree.
Right, with
Yeah.
considerable danger
Yeah.
and storm slabs,
Yeah.
likely. I would think about A
Yeah.
for sure, but
Even
I would not ski fall line.
this roll here
Plan
is quite
B.
steep, and then if
Yeah,
something went, you'd be
and
just
and you're
carried right
gonna
through
you're
those
gonna get
trees.
like nailed into
Yeah.
trees. There's no escape.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
this where
Plan
it's
B is cool
drawn
too.
here
Like
is not, that is not a bad route.
I
Yeah.
love that people chose Plan B. That's a good route. Because
And this,
basically I think just about everything in there, except for maybe one tiny spot, the
yeah.
slopes are all like below 30 or well forested.
This one fits the bill for use terrain wisely, doesn't it? This is
Such
the
a good
wise
route.
Yoda choice
Yeah.
of the mountains. They're always going to be there. There'll always be more days to ride, and
Oh yeah.
this, and what a great place to be along that ridge. And
And for those that chose Plan C, I always think I say to people, look, you know, we're most people that I know, and now in the snowmobile crowd, it's different. I'm not a snowmobiler, but you want to ride and you want to have fun. And when you go to simple terrain, you basically just get to ride and ski as much powder as you can. And you don't have to be like, ooh, should we go here? Should we go there? You spend a lot of time route finding. Whereas in simple terrain, you kind of just get to go. And some days that's just what I love.
yep, yep.
All right, let's do case 4. Okay, let's see what people say now.
This is a great one.
Poor visibility. Boy, did we have a lot of that over the last couple days.
Yeah, and we didn't really talk about the visibility per se in verifying conditions, but it is such an important factor for mitigating risk and really understanding where you are
And route
and what's
finding.
above you as well.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
curious.
yeah. Let's see what people come up with. This
We
will
do have
be,
a quick question in the
yeah.
Q&A, which was about the size, and the avalanche size. It refers to the expected size range of avalanches, and that information appears in the avalanche problems description. And it's one of those things that you drill down a little bit. You got to go a little bit into the forecast. You got to click on the problems tab and consider that. So in this instance, we're thinking as we ride through terrain that with the depth to the weak layer and the amount of snow that's available for getting caught in those avalanches, if you do trigger an avalanche, it's going to be in that size 1.5 to 2.5 range. 1.5, it's right at that limit. You don't really want to be caught in a 1.5, but it's less than a 2, so maybe you're going to be okay. If you get caught in a size 2.5, that's a serious proposition, and that's definitely got the potential to bury, injure, or kill somebody.
Hey James, look at the results here. This is really
Look at
interesting.
this, yeah, right, split 3 ways.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna let you
And
unpack.
you know what? We sold Plan A to some people, didn't we? Because there was a movement, of some people going, yeah, Plan A, you're right. There's
Maybe
a good
people want to ride the rail. They can see the
William said,
trees.
yeah, there's a good escape. I
Yeah,
like that.
yep.
So I don't know what you think, but if it was poor visibility, I would go for Plan C.
I probably would be, I'd be concerned about sort of moving up right into that high terrain. Yeah, I agree. Maybe better to find if there is an opening in these trees. It looks like maybe there are. Sticking in the trees is often the best bet in poor visibility.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I was at a hut in this area,
Mm.
and maybe this is one of the few options, but
Yep.
you know what else it would depend on for me, James, is if I know the area well,
Yep.
right? If I didn't know this area very well, I wouldn't want to go exploring with poor visibility, right?
Yeah.
Like I'd want to find some place where either I know the terrain or I know that there's just good tree skiing, and
Yeah.
because it's so hard to route find when you can't see.
Yeah.
So you could easily get off route, I don't
Yep.
know. It's tricky.
Hey Keith, we're at time or even a little over time. So
Yeah. Well, I
you know,
think
and
we're
I
just about
know
to
that
do.
Lisa was really keen to get back on to
Oh, people are waiting for the prizes.
yeah, and I know that you and I could yak on this for a long time, but I think we should pass back to Lisa to just say some words by way of wrapping
Yeah.
up. And
Yeah. And if there's any last minute questions, bring
yeah,
them, and
Great.
thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks both of you. Before you turn off your cameras, we do have a couple of more questions that have come in. One question is about inclinometers. Do you have an app that you like that does the work of an inclinometer?
Yeah, it's just, I think you search avalanche inclinometer.
Yeah, that's the one I know of too.
Yeah. And then do you get Steve's badass avalanche inclinometer? It's not listed that way in the search engine, but that's what comes up on my screen. I like the name.
And then we have one question that's come in for James. James, last season, Avalanche Canada moved to flexible or dynamic forecasting zones.
Hmm.
And can you talk a bit about why Avalanche Canada made that shift?
Yeah, so we made that shift in response to the problems of the really large regions, and especially where you get conditions where it's not representative in one half of the region, but your storm is tracking through the south of the region, and it was really hard to understand how to break that out. And so we'd find ourselves writing almost two forecasts. In each forecast, we'd be writing for the half of the region with the maybe the most likely weather situation, and then trying to put in caveats for other parts of the region. And so the flexible forecast region system has allowed us to piece together regions that are most similar in terms of conditions. And the previous, the Highway 1 was a good example. That was a previous dividing line between the North and the South Columbias, and that's just a road. It's very arbitrary. The weather systems don't know that that road is there or that we divide things. And so the flexible forecast system allows us to essentially use the same capacity in our forecast shop, in terms of the forecasters and people we have available, but do a much better job, a much more accurate job of delineating those based on conditions. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks. And then are there other questions? Feel free to raise your hand or put the question in the chat box. I'll just wait a couple seconds. I know sometimes they can be a slow start.
I hope we get to do this again sometime.
I agree.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
If there are no more questions, James, I just have a couple more slides to share. If you want to stop sharing your screen.
Oh, yes. We just got a last minute question. Any
Oh,
tips for
perfect.
telling if a natural avalanche is new or old? Keith, you go for that one, and then I'll stop sharing my screen here.
It
Yeah,
looks like we
good
have
one.
one more after that. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends. If it's been snowing, then it's easier to tell because you can tell by how much snow has fallen over the old bed surface. But if it hasn't been snowing, yeah, we often debate that. The other thing is, check to see whether there's wind, because if there's an area where there's potentially wind blowing into it, wind blowing snow into it, then you can kind of say, it looks like the wind has been blowing into it for 12 hours or something, and we make guesses.
Yeah.
But that's the best we can do.
Sharp angles is usually recent, and sort of rounded off corners is usually older.
Yeah, exactly, right. Like the crown of the avalanche is usually, as James said, quite sharp right after but then with a little bit of wind action, you know, it kind of rounds it a bit.
Yeah.
And then we have a question from Dustin. Do you consider human factors when assigning an avalanche danger to the forecast?
That's a really great question, and the simple answer is we don't. You know, I know that there is a narrative out there that oh, it's a weekend, danger ratings are going to go higher than they should do, but we train our forecasters not to do that. We have companion products, and the highest profile is the special public avalanche warnings, and the special public avalanche warnings are designed to account for times and maybe places of increased risk where we're assuming that more people are going to be out in those areas. But the forecasts are very much anchored on conditions, and that's, you know, that's really where we want to keep that.
Awesome.
I think it's over to you, Lisa. And,
All right, great. Well,
wrapping
thank
things
you
up.
both, James and Keith. That was a great webinar to help folks plan and, just as importantly, verify conditions once in the field. There are just so many different variables to assess. And as James and Keith mentioned, a great resource is the daily process. So be like the pros and adopt those 7 steps every day. These webinars are a great starting point or a helpful addition to your avalanche safety know-how, but avalanche education is a lifelong journey and doesn't stop here. The best way to keep learning and keep your skills honed is to take an Avalanche Canada training course. If you haven't taken any courses yet, the AST1 is the place to start. If you've already taken the AST1 and you're spending more time in the backcountry, then the AST2 is for you. There are also great options for training that aren't full AST courses. Companion Rescue Skills is a great course to take every other year to keep your skills fresh. Check out the Cherry Bowl story if you need convincing of that. Another helpful course after AST1 is Managing Avalanche Terrain to give your travel skills a tune-up. And you can take these courses as many times as you want to keep your skills sharp. The Avalanche Canada training courses are run by folks who are vetted by Avalanche Canada and follow our world-leading curriculum. So be sure to check that your instructor is a licensed ACT provider. We're proud to have a great variety and diversity of licensed providers around the country, so you're sure to find a course that's right for you. Okay, and now it's time for the prizes. If you hear your name, please send us an email to producer@avalanche.ca. All right, Amy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Lisa. I'm going to put the email in there as well into the chat box. So I'll go ahead and let you know who the prize winners are now. Tonight, Lisa mentioned we have some Avalanche Canada merchandise, which is super exciting. The first buff and goggle sock from Avalanche Canada go to Shirley Lee. And the second is a buff and a goggle sock, which go to Oscar Lozada. And the final prize for the night is one of our new Avalanche Canada caps, as well as a buff, and that goes to Torin McIver. And if you're interested, I'll also drop the link for the Avalanche Canada merch store in the chat. We got a bunch of new hats, and there's books and everything you can check out there. But I'll pass it back to you, Lisa. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Amy. We appreciate your interest in avalanche safety. You can support essential programs here at AvCan by donating as little as $10. If you can afford it and would like to help, click the link that's going to be in the chat box in just a second to donate, or scan the QR code on the screen. Our next webinar is Wednesday, December 13th. It's Be Avi Savvy, What Search and Rescue Wants You to Know. 2 SAR experts will enlighten you on what happens when you initiate a call and ways that you can be safer in the mountains so you don't need to be rescued. Pre-registration for that is required. Thank you everyone for coming out and showing an interest in avalanche safety. We hope you enjoy your winter in the backcountry, safe from avalanches. Keep doing those snow dances. Good night.